All right. Hello, everyone. I am Andy Simionato. This is episode 30 of We Need to Talk. Today I'll be talking a bit about AI with Karen and Donnachie. But let me just explain what this is. The We Need to Talk lectures are they're linked to the Studios program in the School of Communication Design, which is in the School of Design at RMIT University, situated in Melbourne or Naarm, Australia. Now, there'll be a few of these over the semester, and hopefully we will end in a live event. So we'll be able to gather and share some of your outcomes and experiences from the studios. So let me see. I'll talk a little bit about what you're seeing behind my face in a moment. I'm just going to try and get your camera going, Karen Ann. I think there you are. So, and I'll get this text off, and we'll move over to the slides if you like. But yeah, I'll show a couple of slides of your a typical studio space of yours, and then introduce you, Karen, if I can. Let me see if I can do this. No, obviously I can't. All right. So here you are. I hope everyone can see that. It's looking very cyborg, I think. So welcome, Karen. I do appreciate you doing this with me today. I couldn't think of a better person to talk about AI than you, and also you were extremely handy and close by.
Oh, I'm very enthusiastic to talk about AI. I really like
great.
it. So you can see me with my headset on, looking very human. I'm trying to
Non-human.
merge. I'm trying to merge with my
Oh, is this
computer.
you
Very
trying to look
post-human. Yeah, I'm trying to prove that I'm human by measuring my brainwaves.
All right. So here's a typical day in the life, right? You work with physical computing,
Yeah.
and so electronics, and also creative coding.
Yeah, so I'm an electronic artist is the actual role or description. But yeah, usually I tinker DIY sort of computing, physical computing, working with sensors and microcontrollers and code.
Now, yeah, so lots of new terms, I think, for some students, for some people listening.
Okay,
and so
so
we're going to basically, rather than try and over-explain those terms, they can become very technical and jargonistic. What we'll try and do, what I thought we could do today is, and we discussed showing maybe 2 or 3 works and how these emerging technologies fit into our practice.
Sure. So essentially, I think in really small words, it's sort of like I try to get machines, or we try to get machines to feel, sense, think, process, and make things, create things. So create images and text and things.
Now, there are a number of reasons why you would want to do this, and I think this is a particularly nice set of quotes. So we talk about automated art systems, and there are different reasons for making these systems. We make these out of, as you saw, electronic components.
We upcycle
cameras,
things that we find on the side of the street as well.
Perhaps found machines. And of course, all of that then gets coded on microcontrollers that are readily available. And a lot of this sometimes gets now kind of shoved into a bucket with AI. Which has become a very big bucket, and I think it's dominating certainly the discourse in media, and it's starting to enter into education now.
Well, obviously there's a lot of funding, so there's a lot of capitalist reasons why AI is popular right now. But I think what we do with our automated systems is like the Rich and Knight quote, which is there on the bottom left, the study of how to make computers do things which at the moment people are better. Or Kurzweil's The Art of Creating Machines that perform functions that require intelligence when performed by people. So I think we want to make machines do stuff that you would otherwise expect humans to do.
Right. Okay, well, a lot of words there. Let's see some pictures. So here is the first work. that we made in 2009, 10?
Yeah, we started developing in 2009. It was first released 2010. It was exhibited in a major exhibition solo show in Germany in 2011.
Now, this uses a lot of custom code, which now is sometimes referred to as good old-fashioned artificial intelligence. I'm not making a joke here. It's actually GOFAI. So if you see that, it's sometimes symbolic.
Symbolic AI as
AI
well.
is another term. And let us tell you a little bit about that and how that AI, so we're talking about more than 10 years ago,
Yep.
Was used. If I can get to the next slide. Now, where are we here? You travelled as far as...
So this is in a decommissioned church in Stuttgart, just outside of Stuttgart. It's the Kunstverein, and it is now an art centre. This was one of the very first exhibitions they held. This is a work that Andy and I did together with Antonio Rello, an Italian artist, and the coder Renier Feyen, and we made a only the good, only the bad news machine. So it was an emotional news mapping service, and it was one of the first times that we were aware of where sentiment was brought into play and news was being passed, P-A-R-S-E-D, passed according to whether it was good or bad news, and then displayed on two separate sides.
Now, this was a fairly difficult thing to accomplish, and so we looked at the kind of software that was being used for determining spam, for spotting spam, which at the time was a huge, I mean, it still is a huge problem, but at the time it really used to be quite an important sort of part of your life, was like getting rid of spam, right, and finding the email you actually wanted to read. And so there was a method that used Bayesian filtering. Now, you don't need to know what that is, but just be aware that there was a lot of math, basically.
Oh, there was a lot of weighting of words, like whether a word was significant for the meaning or not in a sentence.
Yeah.
But what was nice was that we would have quite a high success rate towards the during the development and towards the when it was made public. There was a lot of success, let's say. A lot of the good news ended up on onlythegood.org, and a lot of the bad news ended up on onlythebad.org.
Exactly. So we didn't just use a whitelist and a blacklist of words, but instead we used this kind of Bayesian filtering. And these days, that kind of approach would be called GOFAI. 13 years ago, 14 years ago, we started on it. Whatever. Not yesterday.
No, exactly.
How about that? So
now, of course, this was always controversial. What is good news for some certainly could be exactly the same headline, could be bad news for somebody else. So that was something we always had to balance.
That's
and
right, yeah.
We were very happy to have discussions on this with not only within the development team, but with the public.
So emotional news mapping was, I guess, where we started really understanding the potential for a kind of algorithmic sorting of large amounts of data, which here was the news, right, that we were expected to read. So rather than being manipulated by this news, but having our emotions played with, we thought, no, let's sort it out into two types of news, as a challenge and as an artwork. Now, shortly after that moment, you start to see natural language processing as an approach, as a science, sometimes referred to as NLP. Okay, so don't get lost in these terms. We're about to show you an application of that. My face is right over the top of that word, of course, as usual. So where do I go? I'm going to move to here. So let me move on. And this is the kind of thing that you have all surely experienced. So text prompts, Google completing your search terms are all reliant on
I love this.
NLP.
Academics are losers. So the idea of text prediction is what the natural language processing is about. It's the idea that sentences will follow patterns, and these patterns can be coded in a way, or decoded first and then recoded into computing language.
Now, NLP was super important for us because at the same time, right in that first slide, you could see that there was, Karen mentioned that she built her own cameras, so she was working with computer vision. You'll see that sometimes called CV, perhaps, when it's put next to other acronyms like NLP. And of course, it was the beginning of machine learning. We'll come back to machine learning shortly in another work.
And natural language processing was, of course, kick-started or propelled forward by the fact that all of these companies were scanning all the books. So they were learning all of our language and keeping it in their dictionaries.
Yeah, the Google Book Project was claiming, it claimed to have digitized every unique volume, every unique publication in the world. Now, that's a huge data set of language that then was used to train these models. Using machine learning, you could end up with natural language processing methods that could be applied. Let's actually have a look at how that was applied in our case. By 2019, I think we had successfully developed a kind of machine, it was a machine, I guess, that could scan a book using computer vision. And
we like to say read a book. Because...
we often have discussions about over anthropomorphizing these systems. That means we naturally fall into it reads, it thinks, and of course that's science fiction or it's fantasy.
Yeah.
But what you see here,
the difference was that it wasn't just an image of the book. So a scan often would just produce an image, whereas this machine was taking all of the text and passing it for its meaning. So for me, that was kind of as close to reading as we were expecting machines to get.
Optical character recognition, or OCR. And here's a close-up to give you an idea that we just used a couple of cheap cameras, and this was essentially connected to a microcontroller. So, maybe you could just describe what it's doing to these pages really without using too many acronyms.
Okay, so as we said, it looks at the page and it finds all the words. What we asked the Library of Non-Human Books algorithm to do was to look at all of the words that are on the page, and then of those words on the page, decide some words to keep, which would form a haiku poem. We believe that there were so many different ways you could read the same book, like if you came back to a book after a few years, or if you just read it even at another moment during the day, you might read it differently. So we wanted to test that idea to see how many different ways are there of reading a single double page. Now, when the program would then find the haiku to keep, it submitted that haiku to the Google search. Image search, and it would find an image that could illustrate or illuminate that poem.
That's right. So you saw an earlier prototype just then, and some of the first books, but this was, I guess, the more sophisticated series. So we eventually, I show those images of prototypes and iterations because I think it's important to understand that we're not dealing with simply a problem and a solution, but rather we're really searching through the algorithm for what it can and can't do. And then often even the mistakes or the slippages, we call them, can be a way forward. And one way forward were these haiku, were these poems or poetic combinations of words that we started extracting and republishing the book with only those poems in place and these illustrations taken from Google Images. And this gives you an idea of what's inside these books. What you saw there, what you see here, is a book on the psychology of perception. Now, the original book from the 60s was about the way that humans or children learn to understand the world around them. And we thought this one was particularly interesting to use as the first published work through Atomic Activity Books of this, let's say, this system, this automated art system, because to us, we imagined the AI as being taking its first steps, and so we kind of focused.
We wanted to teach it how to see. So Yeah, I think what's really nice about this book as well is that the algorithm wasn't interested in figures, so it left all of the original figures and page numbers in place, and overlaid or superimposed its images that it found from Google image search. But I like this one: warning, data, wish center at observer field, observer wishes. So, obviously
Not all of them work.
It's not
Not
brilliant.
all the poems
It's not
make
brilliant
sense.
poetry.
No.
But I think what is really intriguing about this project is just how many different varieties and variations and flavors each book takes on. So every book will be reread a number of times, and there are different editions of every book, and every one is unique. So I think that that's what we really liked, is that it did really embody that idea that a book at any given time will contain a near infinite number of readings.
So we've made about, I think, 20 unique readings at the moment.
Yeah, with a very similar flavor of algorithm, yeah.
Yeah, with that particular flavor, as you call it. I'll talk about this project and the most recent iterations. I think we've done some exciting new things in it. Well, they're exciting for us. When I'm going to make a little lecture around what is a book, and maybe I'll pick up on that again. But for the moment, I think this was enough about this particular project and its use of natural language processing. Now, this would not have been possible without the research of scientists on NLP. Okay, so this leverages a lot of that, as well as, of course, as we said, computer vision and
but it also repopulates these old dusty books with contemporary culture through the GIFs and memes and things that it picks up.
Exactly. I mean, this is basically a large part of our research is looking at those two competing vectors. The perceived end of one type of medium, like the good old book, and then this new kind of technology, let's call it generally AI, which is kind of sold to us as both the reason why we're losing the old media, and also the way that you can save that old media. So it's given both this dual personality, right, as a destroyer and as a savior. That makes it very interesting for us. So, all right, so that's natural language processing. CV, computer vision, and machine learning. But then we can add to that, right? Speech to text, text to speech. There were some amazing advancements made in voice synthesis and in voice recognition. And in fact, over these years, you see kind of a bunch of new tech entering our homes, like what is it?
Voice assistants.
Voice assistants. Thank you.
Yeah, Google Home and Nest.
Yeah. I didn't want to say the brand names, but you said them anyway. But you probably have had experiences with them in some way, or even through your phone with Siri, etc.
Yeah, there are a couple I can't mention because they'll activate.
Because
here in
they
the
probably
room. They're listening to us.
They'll send us a pizza. And in addition to that, sentiment analysis. So what's really interesting at this point is that we can start to probe into what is positive and negative in the speech. And if you remember that early work from the late 2000s, that was a form of sentiment analysis, but without the tech. It was using Bayesian filtering. All right, Karen, you definitely have to talk to these ones.
Okay, so this is me testing. This is how I work. I just throw together a very lo-fi sketch to test whether things pop up in the right place and whether things are working. So this was my text-to-speech, and I started seeing the words displayed on the page.
Sorry, I thought I was
This is working in P5.js. This is another version that we had running. We were obviously lecturing a lot from remotely, so I offered this as a sort of an augmented transcription service of the lecture as well.
Just to be clear, this is how we were giving our lectures online.
Our classes,
our classes. Yeah. We were obviously obliged because of COVID restrictions to. We weren't allowed on campus, and so we ended up using the time and the energy.
So this was
much time.
Yeah, so this
so
was
much
about.
energy.
So these were experiments in how to display speech to text, and the idea of saying something and having it wither and trying to sort of have it disappear on the screen, or have it censored, self-censored. So these squares obviously would problematize the reading. It would confound the reading.
So that was between 2019 and let's say 2021.
Oh, it was 2020 when we were in lockdown. So 2020,
That year,
yeah.
year and a half of lockdowns that seemed to never end. And it brought us finally to a work that was commissioned by MIT's, what are they called?
CAST. Yes.
At this stage, it was called This Indignant Page, the politics of the paratextual. Paratextual elements are all those parts of the page which are not the words.
Yeah, so it was really fascinating that we knew that the machine learning and the text was being understood, or was being put into these dictionaries of like verb and noun and adverb and what function it had. And we thought, well, it's interesting because that is kind of like the picture or the overview of what the text is all about. So we thought we'd like to sort of bust open that process and try and find a way that becomes an artwork, a collaborative art generation in some way.
So these,
these are early tests of what we can do to draw out text from literature at the time, and then we hooked it up to speech to text. But these are from literary texts, and we wanted to see how we could blend the sort of the linguistics of the text and the words and the meaning and the graphic design of the words.
So in practice, it's kind of a Canva, but for I guess from an artistic perspective, it's
don't say Canva.
It's an automated art system that's using language as a prompt.
Oh, if anything, throw me in the bucket of VJs, video.
All right. So here we have another iteration of it, and all of these may be versions that we can go back to at this stage. We have a much more robust system now, but this is what we were touching on as we went along. So we didn't use these in the end. They were just different versions, I guess, that we were exploring, and you can see we were trying out various typefaces and strategies, more or less abstract.
You can
outcomes.
see, so one of the one of the things that you can see throughout is the fact that we wanted to bring in this sentiment analysis and try and find these bubbles of, net good or net bad, and then that sort of how good or how bad the news or the word is.
So this is a really influential piece for us, and I think it's really I don't know what you think, but I think it underlies so many other works, especially our graphic design, like works that lean towards communication design now, where sort of everything has that parameter of perceived positive or negative, and that or just other kind of emotional factors that then can be fed back into the design in an automatic way. And it becomes a kind of collaboration between the human and the machine. This is getting closer to what we ended up submitting.
Of course, playing around with trendier fonts to see which might work.
We tried a few different things. The font was secondary because, as we said, this was really about finding some. And this is a nice fail, which you can see we kept because we thought there's something in there as well when it doesn't work as expected. And here I think we're almost at the final work here. You can see that this would be, so in other words, this is a page of text that is then communicated through an algorithmic system.
And we wanted to play on the idea of symbolic AI as well. So we literally made symbols for each of the elements of the
That's right.
Of the sentence.
Yeah. So you could turn off the text so that you could focus on only the kind of graphic elements that language generated. So the one on top,
blocks of the language.
So we could either work from the text and then remove the text, or the other way around. Of course, we would experience a body of text and then try and see whether there is any kind of relationship to the language being used or referenced. Eventually, we got it to work on pretty much any kind of web-based system, and then we started having fun with it also from the position of of speaking to it. And that's what you saw right at the beginning of this lecture, was basically this happening in the background, and it was reacting to our voices.
So by the time we, for the MIT exhibition, we kept it as text because it needed to run locally without any dependencies. Instead, this piece, AI seems to be a verb, was exhibited in Norway. And it was set up as a kind of a karaoke poetry, speakeasy, poetry collaboration machine.
Open mic.
So you could, open mic, there you go. You go to the open mic, and with the machine, with this system, it would assist you in making the next word. It would offer you a rhyming word so you could carry on with your poetry.
So we've now gone from good old-fashioned AI, we've gone through natural language processing, the beginning of machine learning. We added to that computer vision and some other technology that was jumping forward in that period. And we've sort of now landed, I think, about a year ago, when OpenAI puts out ChatGPT, right? So. And of course, Twitter sort of melted at that point, and especially anyone working in natural language processing or working with language suddenly got OpenAI got our attention with ChatGPT, both already with the first version. I think I was following it. ChatGPT 2 was already kind of impressive, and then once we saw 3, the third version, we knew that this was what they would call a game changer, I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
So and
it goes to one of those points on the first slide with all those words, which is saying it looks like it's being done with someone with intelligence.
Now, I don't want to get into the kind of ethical and legal complexities of generative AI. I think there's a whole lecture, several discussions around that. Again, I'm just being really clear that today all we're doing is demonstrating the way that these technologies may fit into studio practice. That's our goal.
Or specifically into our practice, and then by extension.
Into a practice. And it may not be the only way. I think that we have colleagues doing this that there's an enormous variety of studio practice around different AIs. I think generative AI, in other words, what we're seeing with ChatGPT, and also the visual versions, I guess, DALL-E and Runway, and I don't know, all the others.
Midjourney.
And Stable Diffusion. TensorFlow. There are a few big companies, and already just the fact that, there are many of them out there, but only a few of these companies have the funds to access the very large data sets that these need to be trained on. Again, another discussion.
And again, also, we're only looking at how these influence sort of the realms and domains of communication design. Obviously, if you want to go into the auto industry or medicine or, any other field, you're going to find exquisite practices that use these technologies.
Exactly. So if you take those and then you start to mix them with WebGL and VR and whatever else you can imagine, you'll end up with some fairly interesting projects. In our, for example, this is just one among many, but I thought it could be a good way to end. We started prompting. What was this? DALL-E?
This is DALL-E. You can tell by the
it's got its little
bar on the
It's got its little logo. We started prompting DALL-E for scenes of the Australian outback. We ended up with a fairly consistent style, and quite frankly, a very very much a colonial vision.
Oil paintings.
Consistency in the style. I think we may have actually said oil painting, but not all of them. And as you can see, fairly impressive results. This one's not so good. But
that's the kind of drawing I do. But obviously, you can even sort of look at and try and decide on the brushwork and whether it's good or not. So how do we use this? We developed, we're the art directors of Art in Australia currently, since it pivoted to digital mid last year when it released the pivot issue. This is the new issue, 58.1, and it's called The View. what we did is we set up a virtual reality cover that gets embedded into the landing page of Art in Australia, and it's fully interactive, so you can go in and walk around. You can also go into it with an Oculus and stand there in the space. So we took these landscapes and we turned them into flats. So it becomes a
kind of
theatrical
theatre.
stage, which for us is a metaphor of the way that as settlers, Andy and I at least, and maybe that can be extended to other settlers in Australia, is how we see country. It has all of these different overlays, and it has sort of a construct for us. So that was the story we wanted to tell through the use of AI, sort of bridging early settlement and
Nice.
AI.
Nice. Thank you. I was just struggling with the software myself to get to this bit here. So we'll conclude on AI seems to be a verb. I think we started off we called the lecture, "What is AI?" And of course, it's a very provocative question. I think hopefully you'll understand a little bit more about the diverse methodologies within AI as a term. We looked at good old-fashioned AI, natural language processing, and then generative AI. I think these three broad areas, and I will, I'll turn on the words for a sec. And I think the final thing that, let's end on this. So what is AI? I think the title of this work became AI seems to be a verb. And we sort of borrowed it from Buckminster Fuller. Okay, so everybody's favorite kind of nerd, or at least
He made geodesic domes.
Yeah. Well, what else do you want to? What else can you say? Buckminster Fuller's original quote was, "I seem to be a verb."
Yes.
And he said this in the 70s, I think, in early 70s. And it was one of those popular terms, along with McLuhan. And, there were a lot of these aphorisms getting thrown about. But this one kind of came back to us in a way that resonated, because we started thinking, well, when Buckminster Fuller said it, of course, he was referring to himself as not a thing, but as part of a larger process, right? And we thought this was a really interesting way to position yourself, situate yourself in the world. And we thought perhaps AI is not a thing.
Yeah, AI is certainly a process. And I think that if you can keep this sort of, if any of you who are delving into AI, just keep in mind that it's not a thing, it's not an other, it's not a singular entity. It certainly is a string of
systems and processes,
coded processes that will generate outcomes that have a nuance that can be confused for human thinking.
That's amazing. I like this. Can be confused for human thinking is a really. You're going to end on a cracker. All right. So. Thank you, everybody, for following along. I think that's probably around 30 odd minutes. And I really appreciate Karen Ann Donnachie joining me today and getting me out of a spot, because I needed to talk to somebody about AI. And I honestly could not think of a more suitable person. So I think in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be looking at what is collage. I think we'll try and get hold of some artists who work in both, analog collage and digital collage. And when I think about digital collage, again, we're going to return back to the notion of generative AI, which I consider a form of digital collage. So you're going to see AI creep into more and more conversations, I think. And well, let's enjoy the ride. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, everybody. And we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks at the next lecture. Thanks, Karen. Were you holding that sneezing? Okay.